How do we know this prophecy wasn't written after the fact just to make Jesus look like an amazing prophet? The answer lies in the book of Acts. Let's walk through the timeline. Luke wrote the Gospel of, you guessed it, Luke, and he also wrote Acts. And in the very first verse of Acts, he says, "In the first book, O Theophilus, I have dealt with all the things that Jesus began to do and teach." The first book he's referring to is obviously Luke, so he finished writing Luke and then went on to write Acts. But here's where it gets interesting. Acts records the deaths of some lesser-known martyrs like the stoning of Stephen in Acts 7, which happened around 33 to 36 AD. So Luke started writing Acts sometime between 33 to 36 AD. He also records the death of James, the brother of John, in Acts 12. So Luke records the deaths of Stephen and James in Acts, but doesn't mention the deaths of Peter and Paul, two of the most prominent figures in the book of Acts. If Acts was written after these events, why wouldn't Luke mention them? The simplest explanation is because they hadn't happened yet. But why is this important? Because Peter died in 64 AD, and Paul died between 64 and 68 AD, and the destruction of Jerusalem happened in 70 AD. Luke also records smaller, less significant prophecies like the famine in the days of Claudius, which happened in the 40s AD. He makes a point to say this took place in the days of Claudius. But Luke never says Jesus' prophecy about the destruction of the temple took place in the days of Titus, because it hadn't happened yet. Not including this event if it had been written afterwards would be like if the capital of the United States was destroyed and wasn't included in the history books. There are also some details in the prophecy itself that don't make sense if it was written afterwards. In Mark's version, Mark 13:18 says, "Pray that it may not happen in the winter." And Matthew adds, "Pray that your flight will not be on a Sabbath." The destruction happened in the summer, so why wouldn't the author just say when it happened if it was written afterwards? Also in Luke 21:21, Jesus says, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." Again, that's an odd detail to include if the city had already been destroyed. So what does all of this prove? First, it shows that Jesus wasn't just a good teacher, he was a true prophet. His prediction was fulfilled exactly as he said it would be. Secondly, this is powerful evidence that the New Testament is historically reliable. It wasn't written decades later with made-up stories, it's based on real events witnessed by real people. And finally, the destruction of Jerusalem reminds us that God is always working out his plan. In this case, it forced early Christians to spread out and take the gospel to the ends of the earth, just as Jesus commanded.